Hello, and welcome to another episode of Entry Level Esports. I'm your host, Trent, and normally on this show, I take your questions from social media and I craft them and I mold them into answers that can impart esports wonderful knowledge to you so that we can all learn together. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to kind of rant about what I want to talk about because it's my show and I can kind of do what I want to with my show. So for those of you that may not have seen it, last week I got into a bit of a Twitter and Reddit argument with about half of the Heroes community over a issue in the HGC that came up as Team 12 put out a application for an intern/analyst to join their team, and people were concerned and upset because that analyst position required a lot of time commitment but didn't offer any sort of salary, didn't have any sort of hourly pay that was commiserate with the requirements of the job. And people were throwing around terms like labor laws and illegal and comparing them to Fortune 500 companies that offer free internships and how wrong that is. And what it really told me was that people in the Heroes of the Storm community don't really understand how esports works and how money within esports works. And so rather than taking some other question this week, I wanted to talk about that topic because it's something that I understand very seriously as someone who has been working in esports as a side job for about 7 years now. So this week's question is going to be from @Trent_Esports on Twitter. And it's going to be, why is everyone in esports losing money? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to explore why pretty much every single person that you can think of in esports is losing money right now. Now, there's a couple of exceptions to this rule. Yes, there are some very, very big organizations, your Team Solo Mids, your Team Liquids, your Virtus Pros, your Fanatics, that may have turned a small profit in 2017. And there are, of course, players who are making significant money. Your top-level Counter-Strike, Dota, League of Legends players are making a significant livable wage from playing esports and streaming and brand deals and things like that. But the overwhelming majority of people in esports, 95% of people who get any sort of income from esports, are losing money right now. Before we can talk about why that is, we need to understand the ways that esports organizations make their money. And there's really four main ways that that happens. The first is from prize money. Prize money is won at big tournaments. It's huge. There's millions of dollars on the line, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, even at smaller events. And most organizations have a clause in their contract that they retain a percentage of the prize money won by their teams. However, the vast majority of the money still goes to the players. The overwhelming majority of it is given away to the players because they're the ones that actually won the tournament. So even though the esports organizations are getting that money, it's a small percentage of the overall money, and prize money is not reliable income. You can't count year over year unless you're SKT or MVP Black on winning millions of dollars of prize money every single year. So you can't really, when you're setting your budget for the year, account for and plan for prize money being a part of your income. It's just sort of an extra bonus. It's like finding $10 on the side of the road. You didn't factor that into your budget, but now you can go get McDonald's this week instead of getting a sandwich from the fridge. The other way that organizations get reliable income is from a developer stipend. There are companies like High Res Studios and Riot Games that actually give organizations money every month for being part of their league and for continuing to stay in their esports or their esports league. And these are really important, especially for smaller organizations or organizations that don't have big sponsors, because they're getting reliable income every single month that they're a part of that league. However, those developer stipends only exist if you're in one of those leagues that actually pays out money. And as far as we understand it as the viewers, Blizzard is not paying that out to any teams in Heroes of the Storm. All they're paying out is the $100,000 per team for player salaries. There might be teams that are keeping that, as we've had issues with payment in the past with some shady organizations, but the design of the HGC is such that Blizzard is paying the players, not the organizations. So that's not reliable income for any team in Heroes of the Storm. The third way, and the way that people think that organizations make a lot of money, is through merchandise. I'm wearing my Renegades jersey, which supports my dear friend Stormtroopy, who's a professional Paladins player. And I also have an Immortals jersey. I have a Cloud9 shirt. I have a decent bit of merchandise. If you watch Troll and HGC, you've seen our host Bags wear his Team Freedom swag every chance he gets, even when he's interviewing people from other teams. But that's beside the point. So people think that organizations can just put together some t-shirts and sell those, and that's a great way for them to get money. However, t-shirt, coffee mugs, jerseys, these things don't have high profit margins. You're not making thousands of dollars with every t-shirt you sell. You're not even making $20 with every t-shirt you sell, because you have to pay for the materials, you have to pay the company that makes and prints the shirt, you have to pay for it to be shipped. There's so many additional costs with making merchandise that you actually don't make a great deal of money per shirt. And as a result, you have to sell a lot of them to turn a significant profit. And right now, esports merchandise sales are on the rise, but it's still not to the degree that it is in other traditional sports, because in traditional sports, you're supporting not only your team, but you're supporting your city, you're supporting tradition, something that's been there for decades, possibly even before you were born, and that you know isn't going to be going anywhere. If you buy a New England Patriots jersey, the New England Patriots aren't next year going to suddenly pick up and move or leave football entirely. The New England Patriots are probably going to be a team for another 30 years. And so that jersey that you have, even if that player leaves, is still going to be a relevant jersey forever. Whereas in esports, there's a lot more turnover that we see. My Immortals jersey that used to support their League of Legends team no longer does, because they're not a League of Legends team anymore. If you bought a Roll20 jersey, nobody knows what Roll20 is. Roll20 esports, as of right this second, does not even exist. So you have a cool piece of collectible legacy merchandise, but you can't actually wear it to support a team anymore. And that causes some people to be more hesitant about buying merchandise in esports, where it's a much easier decision in traditional sports. So all of these things kind of play together to make it so that merchandise seems like a really simple, amazing way for even unsponsored teams like Old Gods and Team 12 and Leftovers to start making significant profit. But because of the overhead that's involved and the cost involved in making merchandise and the volume at which you need to sell merchandise, it really doesn't make sense and doesn't make a significant profit unless you're at that very, very top of esports and you're an S-tier organization with lots of followers and lots of fans in lots of games. And then the last way that esports organizations independently can earn significant revenue is through brand deals, is through signing sponsorships with companies like 5 Hour Energy, Red Bull, HyperX, Twitch, all of these companies. However, what you may have noticed from all of the names I just named is that these are all endemic brands. And when we talk about an endemic brand, what we're talking about is a brand, a company, and a product that already caters to the audience that watches esports. HyperX, Alienware, Red Bull, these guys already market to the gamer culture, to gamers, and they already understand gaming culture. They already understand their customers in this space. And so it's easier for them to get involved here. But that also means that they're not a significantly huge brand with lots of other marketing outside of the tech and gaming space. So that's why we're not seeing a lot of big brands like Home Depot or Pepsi or Dawn soap come into esports, because they're non-endemic brands and esports isn't interesting or attractive to them right now because of where it is. for a couple of reasons. One, it really only yields value if there's a LAN or a really big stream. This is something I've talked about a lot with the HGC, is that reducing the number of LANs that we have in the year reduces the value for esports organizations because you're not putting the players on camera with their jersey. So having HyperX on the logo, having Alienware on your sleeve doesn't actually help that esports organization nearly as much as it does in a game like League of Legends, where it's live every single week and those jerseys are on stream for hundreds of thousands of people every single week. So it's not really worth it for Nissan to put their logo somewhere on an esports jersey if it's not going to be on camera constantly every single week in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Further, a lot of people in esports just aren't marketable to non-endemic brands. You know, these endemic brands, they understand gamer culture. They understand that there's going to be a lot more sensitive material. There's going to be a lot more language that most brands aren't comfortable with. You know, Pepsi or Subway is not going to want to partner with a player who gets on his stream every day and talks about how he just raped that guy in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or how he just murdered somebody in Hero League, or about how all of his teammates are autistic. And these are things that are still very pervasive in esports and in gamer culture. And a lot of us in gaming culture prefer it that way. We prefer to be raw and unfiltered and uncensored and not have to tailor ourselves to what esports wants and to what these family-friendly brands want. You know, there's a lot of backlash going on in the fighting game community right now just about the fact that commentators don't swear anymore. And they can't because they're being paid by a big company like Capcom, who doesn't want swearing on their stream, which is entirely reasonable for Capcom to want. But a lot of people in the fighting game community miss the old days when they could drop F-bombs whenever they wanted on commentary, and it wasn't a big deal because there was nobody whose money mattered who wouldn't give that money if there was foul language. So as a result, a lot of brands just aren't going to come into esports right now and turn in significant money because esports just isn't attractive to them if they're not already an endemic brand. So it's very hard for companies and esports organizations to make millions of dollars year over year off of brand deals because for the most part, those brand deals just aren't lucrative, and the lucrative ones aren't attracted to esports right now. So ultimately, these revenue streams give the organizations enough money to pay for their costs, but they don't give them enough money to turn a significant profit as an organization. And the reason for that is that there's way more costs to running a popular and successful esports organization than these revenue streams can produce. And I want to talk about some of those costs so that you get an understanding of what goes into running an esports organization. You have to pay player salaries. In League of Legends right now, the NALCS has a minimum salary of $75,000. You multiply that by 5, and that's a significant amount of money that you have to pay every single year just to keep your players. And that's not to talk about, that's the minimum salary. A player like Bjergsen, a player like Faker is worth significantly more money than that. And to keep that player on your team, you're going to have to pay them way more than that. So player salaries are a huge cost to any esports organization. Then you have to pay travel expenses. You have to pay for boot camps and hotels and cars just to get to LANs, plane tickets. You know, all of these things are expenses that are incurred by the organization to travel to tournaments. You have operating costs like office buildings, utilities, paying taxes, paying your support staff like graphic designers and writers and coaches and analysts that demand a salary. Every time you hire somebody, you have to pay them a salary if you're a big enough esports organization that you want somebody with experience that is deserving of a salary. You have to have the operating costs for your merchandise. It costs money to pay to print a t-shirt. So you have to already have that capital in order to turn a profit from your merchandise. You have to pay for player housing. You have to factor in lost money from risking acquisitions into new games. Cloud9, when they came into Heroes of the Storm, they didn't make any money from being in Heroes of the Storm. They paid out player salaries, and they paid out the majority of prize money to the teams, and they made jerseys for the players, and they flew them out to events. And they really didn't get anything back for that, because Heroes of the Storm wasn't at a place where it had huge amounts of people sending them money for merchandise and things like that. They weren't, most of the players didn't even stream, let alone have thousands of people viewing their stream for brand deals and for merchandise and for these kinds of things. So that's lost revenue for Cloud9 that they had to factor into their budget for 2015. So all of these costs are usually greater than what an esports organization can bring in through the revenue streams that we talked about earlier. So as a result, if esports organizations are losing money, where are they getting the money to stay afloat? How can a team like Dignitas have existed for the last 7 years if they're losing money year over year? And the way that they can do that is through investment capital. Investment capital is when someone with a ton of money gives some of that money in advance to a company so that that company can pay all of its expenses until they are at a place where they can turn a profit. And this is what pretty much every single esports organization is relying on right now. Even big names like Team Solo Mid and Immortals were created or have recently partnered with investment capital in order to continue operating until esports gets to a place where you can turn a profit. Basically, everyone in esports right now is looking towards the future 5, 10, 20 years from now and hoping that esports will be at a place in 20 years where it's as big as soccer, football, baseball, and people are making millions of dollars from merchandise and from TV deals and from stream sharing and from just support from fans, brand deals, all of these things that are eventually going to come into esports as viewership from traditional sports continues to wane and the younger generation is more and more interested in esports. And as people that are now 13 that love watching League of Legends grow up and become 25 and have lots of disposable income, instead of spending that on football, they're going to want to spend that money on esports. That's what we're all gambling on, but we're not there yet. And as a result, in order to stay afloat now and continue building to that place, we have to have investment capital in order to pay the expenses that are going on right now. So as a result, it's important to understand that, again, unless you are the top of the world in esports, you are not making significant money or any money at all. Most likely, you are spending more money than you're making. Now, all of this wanted to explain to you so that we could bring this back to why I was defending Team 12 last week in not offering a salary, but still trying to recruit an analyst, and why I think that is a reasonable thing for where Heroes of the Storm and where Team 12 are specifically. Because in esports, you have to judge everything based on reality, not based on what it should be. And I want to use myself as an example. So I have a couple of different ways that I make money in esports right now. As a writer, I go out to a variety of different companies and convince them to pay me for content. And I'm going to use 2 different examples for that. I have contracts with Rivals of Aether, which is an indie platform fighter on Steam that you can go buy now that is basically Super Smash Bros. If it was made on the Super Nintendo. It's a really cool game, but it is a very, very small game. They have very little budget for content and for marketing. As a result, when I pitch them content, my rate for them is pretty low. I don't charge them a significant amount of money for content. However, my contract with HTC Esports is for a significantly higher rate, the exact same amount of work. I charge them a significantly higher rate to do any work at all than I do the guys at Rivals of Aether. And the reason I do that is because I know that the guys at Rivals of Aether can't afford to pay me that higher rate. If I stand firm at the rate I believe I'm worth as a writer, I just won't get that job and I won't get that money. And as an up-and-coming writer who's trying to build a portfolio and trying to break into esports to a place where I can eventually get an $80,000 a year job as a writer in esports, I need as much exposure and as many contacts as possible. So it's worth it for me in my career where I'm at right now to take a lower rate from someone that's a smaller organization so that I can build those contacts and build that resume. Now in my portfolio, I have worked directly with a game developer to produce marketing content. That's extremely valuable to me. And earlier in my career, I did it for free. I wrote for Turbine Studios, who was owned by EA at the time. When they made Infinite Crisis, I wrote and recapped their biggest tournament completely for free. They're a company that could pay money, but at the time, esports was smaller. I wasn't a name that was worth money. And so for me to get that job over someone more qualified than me, the only way for me to be competitive for that job was to not take any money. And so I didn't, because it was more valuable to me to have that job and that exposure and that experience than it was to have that money. So as a result, when we look at Team 12, Team 12 doesn't have any money. The players made some prize money last year and they made a $20,000 a year salary, but you take all of that together and they still made like 35 grand last year. That's not a lot of money when you have living expenses, when you recently were in college, when you're trying to live on your own. A lot of you that are watching this right now may not have a lot of living expenses right now. But once you get out in the world, you're going to realize that it costs a ton of money to live. In most places, you need to make more than $35,000 a year just to live. If you live in California, if you live in San Francisco, if you live in New York, it costs you a lot more than that just to live. And so you can talk all you want about, well, if the players want an analyst, they should be giving up a portion of their salary to pay that analyst, but they're barely making it by as it is. And their salaries right now are just for them to live this year, not even to put money aside for retirement and for health insurance and for loss if they lose their job in 6 months. Because that's the thing in esports. If you're a player, you can lose your job 6 months from now and your skills aren't transferable to another job. You can't, if nobody in Heroes of the Storm wants to pay you, you can't go down the street to Overwatch and get on a professional team and be making your same salary. You also can't go down the street to the real estate office and say, hey, I played professional video games for 3 years. I'd like a job as a real estate agent. They're not going to hire you. You can't go to the local high school and say, hey, I was coaching a team for 2 years. I'd like a job as a teacher. The skills aren't transferable directly to you getting another job. So it's important to keep all of your money so that you can continue to live. And by that same token, for the analyst, if you're a brand new analyst in Heroes of the Storm, that has no player history, you have no resume, you have no exposure, you're not going to get the paying jobs. If Fnatic goes out and posts an analyst job tomorrow, you're not going to get that job because there are going to be people more qualified than you who are going to apply because it's a paid job. So everyone who's worth being paid is going to apply for that job and they're going to get that job over you. You have to do something for free first to build up your resume. So the Team 12 job is a perfect opportunity to do that. So again, you have to think about what's realistic. And right now, it is not realistic for Team 12 to pay a full-time salary for 20 to 30 hours a week of work. Further, they have a manager right now who's not making a salary. So for people to be upset at them for posting an application without paying a salary, they're only asking someone to do what someone on their team is already doing in their manager. So all of this to say that, yes, it's bad for the industry for people to take jobs for free. But at the same time, you have to be realistic and think about where you're targeting that outrage. If EchoFox or Fnatic posted an analyst job or a writer job and they didn't offer a salary for it, I would be furious. And if you go back through my Twitter, you can see EchoFox posted a volunteer writing position, and I blew them up on Twitter. I was furious with them. But if the old gods reached out to me tomorrow and said, hey, we'd really like some help with some content because we think it would make us more attractive to a sponsor, I wouldn't charge them a dime because I know they don't have any money. And if I don't think my time is worth doing writing for free, I would turn that contract down and I would refer them to someone who would get more out of doing that work for free than I would. Because I'm now at a place where I can turn down free work. I don't apply for volunteer positions anymore because I have enough experience that I can afford to do that and that I believe I'm worth it. And so in order to keep my rates attractive to me, I turn down free work now. 2 years ago, that was not the case. 2 years ago, if Roll20 had come to me and said, hey, we want some writing, I wouldn't have even asked for any money. Most likely what would have happened is I would have gone to them and said, hey, for free, can I write some player interviews with you so that I can build my resume? But this year, I charged the money because I'm worth it now. As a result, you just have to think about that before you get upset about things in esports. Heroes of the Storm is a teeny tiny baby esport right now. It is not that big. There's not a lot of money in it. Pretty much every organization in Heroes of the Storm right now is going to lose money this year on being in Heroes of the Storm. But they're doing it so that down the road, as Heroes of the Storm grows, they can turn a profit or they can sell their spot and make some money. But right now, they ain't got any money to spare. So if a smaller organization tries to recruit people voluntarily, they're not doing something illegal. It's not the same thing as a Fortune 500 company getting free labor so that they can pay their board bigger Christmas bonuses. That's not what's happening here. It's not the same thing. And so you need to understand that level of perspective before you try throwing around business terms and trying to compare small-time esports to your normal 9-to-5 job. They're not the same thing. They're not going to be the same thing for the next decade, and it's time that people understand that. So, now that I've ranted about that and gotten that out of my system, hopefully next week we'll be able to go back to the regular format. So if you'd like to have your question answered on entry-level esports, be sure to follow me at Trent_esports and follow at TrollsGG and be on the lookout for our Twitter post asking for questions. And next week, you might get your question answered here on the show. Until then, this has been Entry-Level Esports, and I have been Trent, and we will see you next time.